The familiar vibration of the rust bucket's failing stabilizers rattled through Kale Vance's boots as he guided the aging salvage vessel through the debris field of the Xylos asteroid belt. The ship's designation was technically the SS Perseverance, but after nearly a decade of hauling scraps and pushing her beyond reasonable limits, Rust Bucket seemed more fitting and more honest. Looking mighty sparse out here, Arya, Kale muttered to his ship's AI as he scanned the fragmented rocks floating in the endless void. Each asteroid was a potential gold mine or, more often, a worthless hunk of space rock that had witnessed a forgotten battle from a war nobody cared to remember anymore. Analysis suggests diminishing returns in this quadrant, Captain, Arya's methodical voice responded. Salvage opportunities decreased by 63% since our last expedition. Perhaps another sector would. We're here now, Kale interrupted, running a hand through his unkempt dark hair. Besides, the Galactic Concord patrols are thinner out here. I'd rather deal with slim pickings than their bureaucratic nonsense. His distaste for the Concord, the so-called unifying government of the galaxy, wasn't unusual among those who made their living in the Outer Rim. The Concord's regulations strangled independent operators like him while favoring the massive corporations that could afford to pay their excessive tariffs and bribes. Kale had once worn the uniform, believed in their mission. That was before watching his squad die, following orders that made no sense, before realizing the rigid structure served the powerful rather than protected the vulnerable. The debt collectors wouldn't care about his principles, though. 3 missed payments on the Rust Bucket's last overhaul, and they'd start sending more than just threatening messages. He needed something valuable, and soon. Come on, Kale whispered, more to himself than to Arya. Just one decent find. He didn't believe in fate or legends, just skills, his ship, and random luck. In the vast emptiness of space, those were the only things he could count on. The scanner pinged. Energy signature detected, Arya announced. Faint but consistent. Appears to be originating from within asteroid K. 421. Kale leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the readout. What kind of signature? Unknown configuration. Minimal power output, but the wavelength suggests advanced technology. Not consistent with known Concord or corporate designs. A smile tugged at his lips. Unknown often meant valuable, especially out here in the graveyard of a battle the Concord had tried to erase from history. Plot an approach vector, he ordered, adjusting the worn flight harness across his chest. Let's see what we've got. The Rust Bucket groaned as it maneuvered toward the asteroid, a jagged, misshapen rock roughly the size of a small freighter. As they drew closer, Kale's practiced, I caught an unnatural outline partially buried in the asteroid's surface, the unmistakable angular lines of ship's hull. Well, I'll be damned, he murmured. Arya, prep the boarding kit and run a structural analysis. I want to know if that thing's stable enough to enter. 20 minutes later, Kale stood in the airlock, sealed in his salvage suit. The magnetic boots clanked against the metal floor as he ran a final check on his equipment. Multi-tool, scanner, emergency beacon, and a blaster at his hip. Not standard salvage equipment, but the Outer Rim had taught him hard lessons about preparedness. Atmospheric analysis indicates no breathable environment. Arya's voice came through his helmet comm. Hull integrity of the target vessel is compromised in multiple sections. Exercise extreme caution, Captain. Always do, Kale replied, which both of them knew was a lie. The airlock cycled, and Kale stepped out onto the asteroid's surface. The embedded ship came into full view, and he paused. It wasn't like any vessel he'd seen before. Sleek lines despite the damage, with an iridescent hull material that seemed to shimmer even without direct light. No visible propulsion system he could recognize. No external weaponry. No markings or identifiers. Arya, you getting this? He asked, approaching the ship's exposed side where a breach gaped like a wound. Affirmative. No match in database for hull configuration or materials. Recommend caution. The breach was just large enough for Kale to squeeze through. Inside, emergency lights flickered weakly, casting eerie blue shadows across what appeared to be a control room of sorts. No conventional controls, though, just smooth surfaces with occasional luminescent patterns. "This is different," Kale muttered, scanning the area. His device struggled to make sense of the technology, displaying error messages more often than readings. He moved deeper into the vessel. The internal architecture was as alien as the exterior, organic-seeming corridors that curved rather than angled, materials that seemed to absorb sound and light in unnatural ways. In some places, the walls bore scorch marks unlike any weapon damage he'd seen before, patterns that spiraled and branched rather than burned straight through. After navigating several corridors, Kale entered what appeared to be the ship's central chamber. Unlike the rest of the vessel, this room was almost pristine, protected somehow from whatever catastrophe had befallen the ship. At its center stood a cylindrical pod, roughly the size of a person, its surface glowing with faint, pulsing patterns of light. "Arya, what am I looking at here?" Kale asked, approaching cautiously. "Unknown technology, but readings suggest life support functionality." Kale's breath caught. A stasis pod? Those were rare enough, but one of completely unknown design? The potential value just skyrocketed, along with the risk. He wiped condensation from the pod's surface and peered inside. His heart nearly stopped. Within the pod lay a humanoid figure, a woman by all appearances. Her skin bore subtle, shifting patterns of luminescence beneath the surface, like constellations moving under skin. Delicate features were marred by what looked like injuries, strange, branching marks that crawled across her exposed arms and face, glowing a dull red against the bluish patterns of her skin. Most startlingly, she appeared to be alive. Barely. "Arya, I've got a survivor here," Kale said, his voice hushed despite being alone. Humanoid, female, unconscious, showing signs of injury. Unknown species. Caution advised, Captain. Biological readings are inconsistent with known sentient species profiles. Those markings may indicate infection or contamination. The rational part of Kale's mind screamed in agreement with Arya. Unknown alien life forms were unpredictable at best, dangerous at worst. Every salvager knew the protocol: report, quarantine, notify authorities. Even if he didn't trust the Concord, there were procedures for a reason. Yet something about the woman's face, peaceful despite her wounds, struck him. If she died here, alone in the void, no one would ever know who or what she was. Against his better judgment, Kale began examining the pod's exterior, looking for a release mechanism. "Captain, I must strongly advise against. Just help me figure out how to open this thing safely." "Arya," Kale interrupted, "if she dies, we might lose valuable information. And if she lives..." He didn't finish the thought. After several tense minutes of careful examination, Kale located what appeared to be a control interface. The pod hissed softly, the luminescent patterns intensifying before the transparent covering retracted. Cold vapor billowed out as the seal broke. The woman didn't stir. Up close, Kale could see her injuries more clearly. Not cuts or burns, but strange fractal patterns that seemed to have been etched into her very being, disrupting the natural flow of the light beneath her skin. His scanner showed life signs, but they fluctuated wildly, stronger than they should be one moment, frighteningly weak the next. "Arya, prep the medical bay," Kale decided, carefully lifting the slight figure from the pod. She was lighter than he expected, and cool to the touch even through his gloves. "And run every analysis you can on her physiology." "Captain, quarantine protocols clearly state." "She's dying, Arya," Kale said firmly, already making his way back toward the breach. "We can worry about protocols after we save her life." Back aboard the rust bucket, Kale placed the unconscious woman in the small medical bay, little more than an enhanced bunk with monitoring equipment and basic treatment capabilities. Arya's sensors bathed the alien in scanning light, attempting to make sense of her unusual biology. "Analysis inconclusive," Arya reported. "Physiological structure appears humanoid, but cellular composition contains unknown elements. The luminescent patterns appear to be a form of bioelectrical network throughout her body. These disruptions," the scanner highlighted the red, branching marks, are interfering with that network. Is she stable? Kale asked, removing his helmet and gloves. Temporarily. She is demonstrating remarkable cellular regeneration, but also experiencing critical energy depletion. The wounds appear to be healing, but the process is consuming resources faster than her system can sustain. Kale studied her face. Up close, without the pod's distortion, she looked even more human than he'd initially thought, aside from the subtle luminescence beneath her skin. Late 20s by human standards, with features that might have been striking before whatever disaster had befallen her. Can you help her? He asked. I can maintain her current state with supportive measures, but without understanding her physiology, treatment options are limited. Kale nodded slowly. Do what you can. I'm going back to salvage what I can from that ship before someone else stumbles across it. He returned to the alien vessel with containers for anything valuable he could retrieve. Most of the technology was too integrated with the ship to remove, but he managed to salvage some smaller components and what appeared to be data storage devices. In what might have been a navigation center, he found a damaged console still showing fragments of information. Most was incomprehensible, displayed in an unknown language or symbolic system, but occasional words appeared in standard galactic script, jarringly out of place. Loom, Wraith Fleet, Containment Breach. After several hours of methodical salvage, Kale returned to the rust bucket with crates of mysterious components. Their value was unknown, but the uniqueness alone would fetch a decent price from the right collector. He checked on the alien woman immediately. Her condition remained unchanged, the strange patterns of light still flowing weakly beneath her skin, occasionally disrupted by the red, branching marks of her injuries. As he watched, her eyes suddenly flew open. Kale stumbled back in surprise. Her eyes were unlike any he'd seen, seemingly normal at first glance, but with irises that shifted and swirled with the same luminescent patterns that marked her skin, now blazing with intensity. She stared directly at him, her gaze disoriented but somehow penetrating. Her lips parted, and she spoke a single word, Lyra, in a voice that seemed to resonate on frequencies beyond normal hearing. Then her eyes rolled back, the light beneath her skin dimmed, and she was unconscious once more. Kale stood frozen, his heart hammering. That single word had triggered something in his mind. Not a memory, exactly, but a sensation like déjà vu but stronger. As if for a split second, he perceived something vast and incomprehensible just beyond his understanding. Aria, he said, his voice uncharacteristically shaken. What language was that? Unknown, Captain. The word does not match any known linguistic patterns in my database. Kale nodded slowly, unable to shake the lingering effect of the woman's gaze. Keep monitoring her. I need to check what we salvaged. The data storage devices proved frustratingly uncooperative. Even with Aria's advanced decryption algorithms, they yielded only fragments of information, much of it corrupted or in that same unknown language. The technology components were equally mysterious, clearly advanced, but their purpose remained elusive. After several days of drifting in the asteroid field, making limited progress with the salvaged items, Kale knew they needed to dock somewhere for repairs and supplies. The rust bucket had sustained minor damage during their hasty exit from the asteroid field, and the medical bay's resources were being stretched by their mysterious passenger. Set course for Whisper Base, he decided. We can make repairs and maybe find someone who can help with our guest. Whisper Base wasn't on any official star charts. A hollowed-out asteroid that had been converted into a trading post and refuge for those who preferred to avoid Concord attention. It was exactly the kind of place where unusual goods could be traded without questions, and where unusual medical cases might find discreet attention. They docked at the base 2 days later, the rust bucket limping into a berth near the outer ring. Kale secured the ship, setting Aria to alert him of any change in the alien woman's condition, and ventured into the station's crowded, poorly lit corridors. His first priority was arranging repairs for the rust bucket. He found a mechanic willing to work for a reasonable price, then made his way to the trading district to see what information he could gather about his mysterious salvage. The marketplace was a chaotic blend of legitimate commerce and black market dealings, all conducted under the hazy light of aging illumination panels. Cale moved carefully through the crowd, alert for both opportunity and danger. In a dimly lit corner of a rundown bar, he overheard a conversation that made him pause mid-step, saying the Wraith fleet's been more active lately. A grizzled spacer was muttering to his companion. 3 ships gone missing along the core ward route. No distress calls, no debris. The Wraiths are just stories to scare new pilots, his companion scoffed, though her voice held a trace of uncertainty. Tell that to the crews of those ships, the first man replied. Or to Jarek's cousin. He was running security for a Concord research vessel. Said they were hunting something unique. Next thing, Wraiths came out of nowhere. Professional job. Surgical. Only took specific individuals. Left the rest floating. Cale slipped into a nearby booth, angling to hear more while pretending to study a datapad. You know what I heard? The woman leaned closer. They're hunting the Starweaver. Her companion laughed nervously. Now I know you're drunk. The Starweavers are myths. Ancient. History. Extinct. That's what they want everyone to think. But word is, one's been spotted near the Xylos graveyard. And if the prophecies are right about the return of the Weavers. They lowered their voices further, and Cale couldn't catch the rest. But a chill had settled in his spine. Xylos graveyard. Precisely where he'd found the alien ship and its mysterious occupant. As he nursed his drink, Cale became aware of subtle movements throughout the bar. Individuals scanning the crowd with too much focus, communications being exchanged with too much precision. Bounty hunters, or something worse. He finished his drink and left casually, resisting the urge to look over his shoulder. Back in a more populated section of the station, he located a public data terminal and accessed the galactic archives using an old military code he'd kept from his Concord days, one that still worked for basic information retrieval. He searched for Starweaver. Most results were restricted, heavily redacted, or flagged as mythological. But even through the censorship, a picture began to emerge. An ancient species, thought extinct, with the ability to perceive and manipulate the cosmic energies that flowed through space, particularly those associated with hyperspace travel. One fragmentary report caught his attention. A classified warning about a possible Starweaver sighting near the Xylos sector, coinciding with the location of the derelict ship and an enormous bounty placed by a shadowy corporate entity identified only as Ethel Corporation. The pieces clicked together in Cale's mind. The woman aboard his ship wasn't just any alien. She was potentially the last of species believed extinct, one with abilities that certain powerful entities would pay handsomely to control. And if the bounty hunters at the bar were any indication, he wasn't the only one who knew. Cale hurried back to the rust bucket, suddenly aware of eyes tracking his movement through the station. He needed to leave, and quickly. He found the woman, Alara, awake, sitting upright on the medical bay's bunk. Her eyes, still swirling with inner light, fixed on him immediately as he entered. You're awake, he said unnecessarily, stopping at a cautious distance. She stared at him with an intensity that was almost physical. When she spoke, it wasn't in words but in impressions that somehow formed in his mind. Danger, pursuit, urgency. I know, Cale replied, surprised at how naturally he responded to the nonverbal communication. There are people looking for you. Dangerous people. Her expression shifted, and he received a clearer impression, a name, or title. Forlag. Commander of the Wraiths. Working for a power-hungry corporation, Ethel. Images of a ship. Her ship being attacked, torn apart by weapons that seemed to target not just the vessel, but something more fundamental. The Wraith fleet attacked your ship, Cale pieced together. They're working for Ethel Corporation. They want something you can do. Her response came in another wave of images and sensations. Cosmic pathways, invisible to normal perception, but vital for interstellar travel. The Loom, a network of these pathways that certain rare individuals could perceive and, to some extent, manipulate. They want your ability to navigate hyperspace, Cale realized. To control the Loom. She nodded, relief evident that he understood. She tried to stand but faltered, the red branching marks on her skin flaring painfully as she moved. "Easy," Kale steadied her. "You're still recovering." A warning flashed across his mind, her impression of armed figures approaching the rust bucket. "Arya," Kale called sharply. "Security scan, exterior. Multiple armed individuals approaching, Captain. They appear to be attempting to breach the airlock." "Initiate emergency departure sequence," Kale ordered, helping the alien woman toward the cockpit. "We're leaving now." The rust bucket's engines roared to life, the ship shuddering as it pulled away from the docking clamps before they were fully disengaged. Alarms blared as the station's automated systems registered the unauthorized departure. Multiple vessels powering up in pursuit. Arya reported as they cleared the station. Identifying signatures. Mixed configurations, heavily modified for combat. "Bounty hunters," Kale muttered, hands flying across the controls. "The worst kind, the organized ones." The woman, he decided to call her Alara for now, since she hadn't corrected him, placed a trembling hand on the navigation console. Immediately, Kale felt an impression of safe paths, hidden routes the pursuers wouldn't know. "You want me to trust your navigation?" he asked incredulously. "No offense, but you can barely stand." Her gaze was steady despite her physical weakness. "Trust," she seemed to say. "The loom never lies." "Fine," Kale conceded. "Arya, prepare to input manual navigation coordinates." What followed was the strangest piloting experience of Kale's life. Alara would touch the console, her eyes flaring with inner light, and he would receive impressions of vectors and adjustments that made no logical sense, but that he implemented nonetheless. The rust bucket veered into regions of space that appeared empty on sensors, but that Alara somehow knew contained disruptive energies that would confuse their pursuers' tracking systems. "This is insane," Kale muttered as he guided the ship through a particularly tight maneuver between two energy distortions that the sensors only detected once they were almost upon them. Yet her guidance was flawless. The pursuing ships fell behind one by one, unable to match their seemingly erratic course without the benefit of Alara's perception. Hours later, when they had finally shaken the last pursuer, Kale engaged the autopilot and turned to his mysterious passenger. She had collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, the luminescence beneath her skin dimmer than before, the red marks more pronounced. "You need rest," he said, rising to help her back to the medical bay. She resisted weakly, sending him urgent impressions. They weren't safe yet. The wraiths would find them again. She needed to reach sanctuary, a hidden refuge of her people. "Your people?" Kale asked, surprised. "I thought the Star Weavers were extinct." "Not extinct," she conveyed. "Hidden, waiting." She was a scout and explorer, one who had ventured out to observe the state of the galaxy and had been caught unaware by the Wraith fleet. She needed to return to warn the others that Ethel Corp had developed technology specifically designed to capture and exploit the Weaver's connection to the loom. "And where exactly is this sanctuary?" Kale asked, already suspecting the answer wouldn't be simple. Her response confirmed his suspicion. Sanctuary existed partially outside normal space, accessible only through specific points in the loom that were hidden from conventional detection. She could guide them there, but the journey would be perilous, especially with the wraiths hunting them. Kale considered his options. The rational choice would be to drop her at the nearest neutral port and wash his hands of the whole affair. He'd already risked more than was sensible for a stranger, no matter how unique or valuable. But something about Alara's quiet determination and the gravity of what she'd shown him. A corporation seeking to weaponize the fundamental pathways of space travel, tugged at principles he'd thought long buried beneath years of cynicism. He thought of his squad, following orders that led them to slaughter because the Concord valued rigid protocols over adaptability and human judgment. How different were Ethel Corp's ambitions? Really? Both represented power without wisdom, authority without compassion. "All right," he decided. "We'll try for your sanctuary. But first, the rust bucket needs repairs, and you need to recover your strength." Relief washed over her features, and he felt a gentle impression of gratitude touch his mind before she finally allowed herself to be led back to the medical bay. Over the next days, as they drifted through a remote sector, making basic repairs with their limited resources, Elara grew stronger. Her communication became clearer, though still primarily nonverbal. Impressions and images rather than words, as if her thoughts operated on frequencies human language couldn't quite contain. She explained more about the Star Weavers and the Loom. Her people had once been numerous, serving as guides and caretakers of the cosmic pathways that made interstellar civilization possible. But conflicts with younger species who feared what they didn't understand had driven them into hiding millennia ago, retreating to sanctuary and passing into legend. Only recently had they begun cautiously reconnecting with the wider galaxy, sending scouts like Elara to observe how the interstellar community had developed. What she had found was troubling, especially Ethel Corp's research into technologies that could detect and manipulate the Loom without Weaver assistance, potentially destabilizing the delicate energy patterns that made safe hyperspace travel possible. Kale, in turn, shared his own story. His disillusionment with the Concord after watching rigid adherence to protocol cost the lives of his squad, his years drifting through the outer rim, taking salvage jobs, and avoiding entanglements. Telling it aloud made him realize how empty those years had been. Survival without purpose, freedom without meaning. Their fragile peace ended abruptly when Arya detected unusual energy signatures approaching. Signatures that didn't match known propulsion systems. The Wraith fleet, Elara conveyed, her eyes wide with alarm. "They found us." "How?" Kale demanded, rushing to the cockpit. "We're nowhere near established routes. There's no way they could track us conventionally." Alara's answer chilled him. They were tracking her connection to the Loom itself, using the technology they'd developed specifically to hunt Weavers. "Arya, evasive maneuvers," Kale ordered, dropping into the pilot's seat. "Maximum power to engines." Unable to comply fully, "Captain," Arya responded. "Engine efficiency at 63% due to incomplete repairs." "It'll have to do," Kale muttered, manually plotting a course away from the approaching signatures. "Elara, I need your help navigating again." She joined him, visibly steeling herself despite her still recovering condition. As before, she placed her hand on the console, her eyes flaring with inner light as she connected with the Loom. What followed was a desperate chase through regions of space that defied conventional navigation. Elara guided them through hidden currents in the fabric of space-time, pathways invisible to standard sensors, but that allowed the damaged rust bucket to stay ahead of their technologically superior pursuers. But the Wraith fleet remained relentless, adapting to their tactics, using their specialized technology to predict where the hidden pathways would emerge. "We can't outrun them forever," Kale said grimly after a particularly close encounter left the rust bucket's port stabilizer damaged. "And we're still nowhere near your sanctuary, are we?" Alara's expression was somber as she conveyed their dilemma. The direct route to sanctuary was too heavily monitored now. Forlag had predicted their ultimate destination and positioned scouts along likely approaches. They would need to take a more circuitous path, through regions of space even Weavers typically avoided. "What kind of regions?" Kale asked warily. Her answer came in impressions of vast, energetic disturbances, remnants of ancient cosmic events, areas where the Loom itself was frayed or tangled, creating unpredictable effects on both ships and living beings. Some were natural hazards. Others were remnants of ancient conflicts between powers that had manipulated the fundamental forces of the universe. "Fantastic," Kale muttered. "From bad to worse." Yet they had little choice. With the Wraith fleet closing in and the rust bucket in no condition for a prolonged chase, they needed to find a path their pursuers wouldn't dare follow. Elara guided them toward a nearby stellar phenomenon, a collapsing hyperspace lane that appeared on conventional sensors as nothing more than a minor radiation anomaly. As they approached, however, Kale began to perceive unsettling distortions in the space around them, as if reality itself was becoming less stable. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice steady as warning alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Alara's response was complex, confidence in her navigation abilities, but concern about the increasing instability of the collapsing lane. It had degraded further since her last passage. Traversing it would require perfect synchronization between her perception of the loom and Kale's piloting skills. "No pressure," Kale muttered, gripping the controls tighter. They plunged into the distortion. Immediately, the rust bucket's systems began to fluctuate wildly. Gravity oscillated, causing loose objects to float momentarily before crashing down. The view screen displayed impossible colors as light itself behaved according to unfamiliar physics. Alara stood beside him, one hand on the console, the other gripping his shoulder. Through that contact flowed her perception of the loom. Pathways and currents invisible to instruments, but crucial for their survival. Kale flew as much by her impressions as by his own senses, making adjustments that felt wrong, but that somehow kept them moving forward through the collapsing lane. Behind them, one of the pursuing Wraith ships attempted to follow, and immediately began to break apart as its hull encountered forces it wasn't designed to withstand. The remaining pursuers pulled back, unwilling to risk the same fate. But their victory was short-lived. As they progressed deeper into the distortion, Alara suddenly stiffened, her grip on Kale's shoulder becoming painful. Through their connection, he felt her encounter something within the loom, a presence, ancient and malevolent, awakened by their passage. "What is that?" he gasped as tendrils of dark energy began to manifest in the space around them, reaching for the ship. "Trap," Alara conveyed urgently. "Old enemy of my people. Set long ago." The tendrils weren't merely physical phenomena, but something more fundamental. Attacks on the very fabric of space-time around them, attempting to ensnare them in a pocket of corrupted reality. Alara released Kale's shoulder and stepped back, her expression resolute. She needed to confront this threat directly, through her connection to the loom. Kale would need to pilot conventionally for a moment, keeping them moving forward while she dealt with the ancient trap. "Be careful," Kale warned, not entirely understanding what she intended, but recognizing the determination. In her eyes, Alara closed her eyes, and the luminescence beneath her skin intensified dramatically, patterns flowing faster and brighter than he'd seen before. The red marks of her injuries flared in response, causing her visible pain, but she remained focused, her consciousness extending beyond the physical confines of the ship. Kale fought to keep the rust bucket on course as systems failed around him. The view screen showed the tendrils of dark energy converging, attempting to encircle them, while ahead the hyperspace lane continued to collapse, narrowing their path to safety. Through it all, Alara stood motionless, locked in some unseen confrontation. Occasionally, the dark tendrils would recoil, as if encountering unexpected resistance. Other times, they would surge forward, and Alara would flinch, new branching red marks appearing on her exposed skin. The ship shuddered violently as one of the tendrils brushed against their shields. Arya's voice came through fragmented, hull integrity. 70%. Critical systems. Failing. Alara, Kale shouted, unable to maintain their course much longer with the ship coming apart around them. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." Her eyes snapped open, blazing with inner light. Through their connection, Kale received a single, urgent command: dive. Without hesitation, he plunged the rust bucket downward, toward what appeared to be a solid wall of energy distortion. Every instinct screamed against it, but he trusted Alara's perception of the loom more than his own eyes. For a terrifying moment, the ship seemed to dissolve around them, reality itself becoming questionable as they passed through what Alara had perceived as a hidden breach in the trap. Then, with a violent lurch, they emerged on the other side of the collapsing lane, systems rebooting as they returned to normal space. Kale turned to find Alara collapsed on the deck, the luminescence beneath her skin dangerously dim. New red fractal patterns spread across her visible skin. He abandoned the controls, rushing to her side. "Arya, autopilot," he ordered, carefully lifting Alara's limp form. "And damage report." "Multiple systems compromised," Arya responded. "Life support stable, but limited." Propulsion at 47%. No pursuit detected, but long-range sensors are offline. Kale carried Alara to the medical bay, his concern deepening as he noted how the vibrant patterns beneath her skin had faded to a dull glow, the red marks of her injuries now dominating. "What happened back there?" he asked softly as he placed her on the bunk. Her response came weakly. Impressions of an ancient conflict, traps left by enemies of the Weavers long ago, designed to sever their connection to the loom. She had fought it, using her own connection as both shield and weapon, but the effort had drained her severely. "Rest," Kale told her, activating the medical bay's limited healing protocols. "You've done enough for now." As she drifted into unconsciousness, a final impression touched his mind. Gratitude, but also urgency. They had evaded the trap and the Wraith fleet, but their journey was far from over. And now, with the rust bucket damaged and Alara weakened, they were more vulnerable than ever. In the days that followed, they limped through lesser-known regions of space, making minimal repairs with their dwindling resources while Alara slowly recovered her strength. The connection between them had deepened during their passage through the collapsing lane, Kale occasionally perceiving faint impressions of the loom even when not in direct contact with her, while Alara began to communicate with increasing clarity, sometimes even forming actual words alongside her mental impressions. They settled into an uneasy routine, alternating between cautious movement towards sanctuary and periods of drifting in the shelter of nebulae or asteroid fields to conserve power and avoid detection. Alara's recovery was slower this time, the red fractal marks proving more resistant to healing, though the luminescence beneath her skin gradually strengthened. During one of their rest periods, hidden within the dust clouds of an ancient supernova remnant, Alara managed to convey more about the nature of her people and their relationship with the cosmos. The Star Weavers had not evolved like other species, she explained. They had emerged alongside the universe itself, their consciousness intertwined with the fundamental energies that flowed through existence. The loom, the network of pathways that made faster-than-light travel possible, was as much a part of them as their physical bodies, and they its caretakers. But their unique nature had made them targets throughout history. Some species feared them, others coveted their abilities. The conflict that had driven them into hiding had nearly destroyed the loom itself, forcing the Weavers to retreat to Sanctuary, a pocket of space-time they had crafted as a refuge, where they could maintain the loom's integrity while remaining hidden from those who would exploit them. Ethel Corporation's interest was particularly dangerous, Alara explained. Unlike previous threats who had sought to capture or destroy Weavers out of fear or religious conviction, Ethel approached the matter with cold scientific precision. They had somehow obtained ancient artifacts related to Weaver technology and reverse-engineered a means to detect and interfere with the Weaver's connection to the loom. Their goal was to weaponize these abilities to control hyperspace travel throughout the galaxy, effectively holding interstellar civilization hostage. "But why send you out alone?" Kale asked, the question forming in his mind and aloud simultaneously as their communication methods blended. "Scouts," Alara impressed upon him. "Many of us scattered throughout galaxy, observing, assessing threats." She had been assigned to investigate rumors of Ethel's research, but had underestimated how far they'd progressed. The Wraith fleet, led by Commander Forlag, had ambushed her ship using technology specifically designed to disrupt her connection to the loom, preventing both effective defense and escape. "And now they're tracking that same connection to hunt you down," Kale mused. "Which means we can't stay hidden forever." "No," Alara agreed, her expression solemn. "Need to reach Sanctuary. Warn others. Prevent Ethel from finding more of my kind." Kale leaned back in his chair, considering their situation. The rust bucket was barely holding together after their escape through the collapsing hyperspace lane. Alara was recovering, but slowly. And, somewhere out there, the Wraith fleet was hunting them with single-minded determination. "What happens if we make it to your sanctuary?" he asked finally. "What's in it for me?" The question was more pragmatic than he intended, but years in the Outer Rim had taught him to think in terms of survival. Heroic gestures were fine for those who could afford them. Alara studied him, her luminescent eyes seeing more than just his physical form. Gratitude, she conveyed. Reward. Safety. The Weavers had resources beyond conventional understanding. They could repair his ship, clear his debts, provide him safe passage through regions of space others couldn't navigate. Sounds too good to be true, Kale remarked, though he couldn't deny the appeal. But I suppose getting paid is secondary to staying alive at this point. Her response was unexpectedly direct. Spoken words, though soft and halting. Not just survival. More. Purpose. Kale stared at her in surprise, both at the verbal communication and the insight behind it. Before he could respond, Arya's voice cut through the moment. Captain, anomalous energy signature detected. Configuration matches previous encounters with Wraith vessels. Distance and vector? Kale demanded, instantly alert. Approximately 3 light minutes from our position, moving in a search pattern. They have not detected us yet, but their course will bring them within sensor range in approximately 17 minutes. Kale turned to Alara, who was already struggling to rise from her seat. I take it hiding isn't an option this time? No, she confirmed grimly. Too close. Their technology will detect my connection to Loom even through the nebula. Then we run, Kale decided, heading for the cockpit. Arya, prepare for emergency acceleration. Divert all non-essential power to engines and shields. Compliance will reduce life support to minimal levels and completely disable long-range communications, Arya warned. Just do it, Kale ordered, sliding into the pilot's seat as Alara joined him. The rust bucket shuddered to life, maneuvering slowly out of the dust cloud that had concealed them. Once clear, Kale pushed the engines to their limit, the ship's frame protesting as acceleration forces strained its damaged structure. Which way? He asked Alara. She placed her hand on the navigation console, her eyes flaring with light as she connected with the loom. The patterns beneath her skin brightened, but the red fractal marks also intensified, clearly causing her pain as she pushed her recovering abilities. Impressions flowed into Kale's mind, a complex route through sectors he'd never have considered navigable, utilizing hidden currents in the loom to accelerate their journey. The final destination remained shrouded, but the immediate path was clear. Got it, he confirmed, adjusting their course accordingly. Arya, they'll detect us any minute. Prepare for evasive maneuvers when they do. Acknowledged, Captain. Recommend caution. Structural integrity may not withstand aggressive maneuvering. Noted, Kale replied grimly, but it definitely won't withstand Wraith weapons. They managed to put significant distance between themselves and the searching Wraith vessel before alarms indicated they'd been detected. Multiple ships appeared on sensors, converging rapidly from different directions. They were waiting for us, Kale realized. That first ship was just flushing us out. Alara nodded, her expression tight with concentration as she continued to guide their course through invisible pathways in the loom. Through their connection, Kale sensed her struggling. The effort of maintaining her connection while evading Forlag's specialized detection technology was taking its toll, the red fractal marks spreading visibly across her skin. Don't push too hard, he warned. We need you functional when we reach Sanctuary. If we reach Sanctuary, her impression corrected, though she didn't slow her efforts. The pursuit became a deadly game of cat and mouse through regions of space that defied conventional navigation. The Wraith Fleet's ships were faster and better armed, but the Rust Bucket had 2 advantages: Kale's unorthodox piloting skills and Alara's unique perception of pathways invisible to their pursuers. They skirted the edge of a neutron star's gravitational influence, using its distortion of space-time to mask their trajectory. They dove through the scattered remnants of a shattered moon, debris pinging against the Rust Bucket's already strained shields. At each turn, Alara guided them through shortcuts in the loom that allowed them to maintain their lead despite the Rust Bucket's deteriorating condition. But the Wraith Fleet adapted quickly, their specialized technology allowing them to predict some of these shortcuts and position ships accordingly. Twice they nearly found themselves surrounded, escaping only through maneuvers that pushed the rust bucket dangerously close to structural failure. During a brief respite while they hid within the magnetic field of the gas giant, Ilera conveyed urgent news. They were approaching a potential entrance to Sanctuary, but it was heavily guarded. Forlag had somehow anticipated their destination and positioned his main force there. How is that possible? Kale demanded. Even I don't know where we're going exactly. Logic, Ilera impressed. Limited entry points known from ancient lore. Strategic placement of forces. Kale cursed under his breath. So our options are to either fight through their blockade or find another entrance that might be thousands of light years away. Neither, Ilera corrected. There is another way. Her plan was audacious and desperate. The main force was indeed blockading the primary entrance to Sanctuary, but that entrance was merely a stable, safe passage through the loom. With her abilities and Kale's piloting, they could potentially forge a direct path. Dangerous and temporary, but potentially undetectable until too late. The catch? Doing so would require Ilera to fully embrace her connection to the loom, pushing beyond the conservative limits her people normally observed. The effort might burn her out completely, especially in her already weakened state. That's not an option, Kale stated flatly. We'll find another way. Must, Ilera insisted, her mental impression unusually forceful. No time. Ethel Corp will find others of my kind. Need to warn Sanctuary. And what good is a warning if you don't survive to deliver it? Kale argued. Her response was simple but profound, an impression of the greater purpose that transcended individual survival. The loom itself was at risk. If Ethel succeeded in weaponizing the pathways that made interstellar travel possible, countless lives would be affected. Her life, even her existence as a weaver, was secondary to that responsibility. Kale recognized the expression in her eyes, the same one he'd seen in the mirror years ago, before disillusionment had clouded it. Duty, purpose, the willingness to risk everything for something greater. There has to be another way, he insisted, but with less conviction. None in time, she replied gently. Before they could debate further, Arya's voice cut in. Captain, multiple vessels approaching rapidly. Configuration matches Wraith fleet signatures. Estimated time to weapons range, 3 minutes. Kale met Ilera's luminescent gaze. You're sure about this? Yes, she conveyed, determination overriding her fear. Then let's do it, he decided, turning back to the controls. Arya, divert all power to engines and shields. We're making a run for it. The rust bucket burst from its hiding place within the gas giant's magnetic field, engines straining as they accelerated toward a seemingly empty region of space. The pursuing Wraith vessels adjusted course immediately, weapons systems powering up as they closed the distance. In the co-pilot's seat, Ilera closed her eyes, the luminescence beneath her skin intensifying dramatically. The red fractal marks that marred her body began to glow as well, no longer just disrupting her natural patterns, but seeming to merge with them, creating new, more complex configurations. Through their deepened connection, Kale felt her consciousness expand outward, reaching into the loom itself. Not merely perceiving the existing pathways as before, but actively manipulating them, bending and weaving the very fabric of space-time. The first shots from the pursuing Wraith vessels streaked past the rust bucket, energy weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. They wanted Ilera alive. Kale executed evasive maneuvers, but the damaged ship responded sluggishly, its systems pushed beyond sustainable limits. We need that doorway now, he shouted, as a glancing hit sent power fluctuations cascading through the ship's systems. Ilera didn't respond verbally, but through their connection, Kale sensed her progress, the tremendous effort as she gathered and shaped energies beyond normal perception, creating a temporary rupture in space-time that would lead directly to Sanctuary. Another hit rocked the ship. Shields at 28%, Arya reported. Hull breach on Deck 2. Emergency containment active. Kale glanced at the tactical display. More Wraith vessels were converging on their position, including a larger command ship that had just emerged from hyperspace. Forlag himself, Kale guessed, coming to oversee the capture personally. Come on, he muttered, executing another desperate evasive maneuver as energy weapons fire intensified around them. Suddenly, space itself seemed to ripple before them, a distortion that started small but rapidly expanded into a swirling vortex of energy, unlike any hyperspace window Kale had ever witnessed. Colors beyond normal perception bled into visible space, creating patterns that echoed the luminescence beneath Illyra's skin. "Is that it?" Kale asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes." Illyra's response came with desperate urgency. "Hurry. Cannot maintain long." Kale didn't need to be told twice. He aimed the rust bucket directly for the center of the vortex and diverted all remaining power to the engines, ignoring Arya's warnings about structural integrity. As they approached the rupture, the Wraith vessels intensified their fire, recognizing Illyra's intention. The rust bucket's shields failed completely under the assault, and damage reports flooded in from all sections. But they were committed now. Kale held their course steady as they plunged into the swirling energy vortex, the fabric of reality itself seeming to stretch and distort around them. For a timeless moment, the rust bucket existed in a state beyond normal space-time, surrounded by energies and geometries that no human was meant to perceive directly. Kale felt his consciousness struggling to process what his senses reported, while beside him, Illyra burned like a living star, her entire being channeling and directing the impossible forces surrounding them. Then, with a violent lurch that sent Kale slamming against his restraints, they emerged on the other side, into a space unlike any he had ever seen. Stars shone with unusual clarity, their light undimmed by the normal distortions of space. Nebulae and cosmic structures displayed colors beyond the normal spectrum, hinting at energies and properties invisible in normal space. And directly ahead, seeming to float in the void, was what appeared to be a vast structure, or perhaps a collection of structures, that defied easy description, its architecture both organic and geometric, existing in more dimensions than Kale's mind could fully process. Sanctuary. But there was no time to marvel at the sight. The rust bucket was coming apart around them, its systems failing catastrophically after the strain of their passage. And beside him, Illyra had collapsed in her seat, the luminescence beneath her skin dimmed to a dangerous flicker, the red fractal patterns now dominating her visible form. "Arya, emergency landing procedures," Kale ordered, though he wasn't sure the AI was even functional anymore. He reached for the manual controls, trying to stabilize their approach toward the impossible structure ahead. Before he could make any progress, the rust bucket was suddenly enveloped in a soft, golden light. The violent shaking ceased, the cascade of system failures halted. Through the view screen, Kale saw other vessels approaching, ships with the same iridescent, organic geometric design as the derelict where he'd found Illyra, but intact and clearly functional. The Star Weavers had found them. What followed was a blur of activity as their ship was guided safely to a docking area within the vast structure of Sanctuary. Being similar to Illyra, their skin alive with luminescent patterns, boarded the rust bucket and quickly assessed the situation. They communicated in that same nonverbal manner, impressions and images rather than words, but Kale found he could understand the general meaning: concern for Illyra, surprise at his presence, urgency in their response. Illyra was taken away immediately for treatment, while Kale was escorted deeper into Sanctuary. He went without resistance, too overwhelmed by the environment to do more than follow along and attempt to process what he was experiencing. Sanctuary defied conventional physics and architecture. Spaces seemed larger inside than their exterior dimensions would allow. Gravity shifted subtly as they moved through different sections. Light emanated not from fixtures, but from the structure itself, pulsing in patterns that seemed almost meaningful, like a language written in luminescence. The weavers themselves were varied in appearance, some more humanoid like Illyra, others more abstract in form, as if physical bodies were partly optional in this place where reality itself seemed negotiable. All shared that distinctive luminescent patterning beneath their skin or equivalent surface, though each pattern was unique, like a fingerprint or signature. They finally brought him to a chamber where several elder weavers waited, their patterns more complex and intense than the others, suggesting greater age or status. One stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Kale's forehead before he could react. A flood of impressions and images filled his mind. Gratitude for bringing Ilera home, acknowledgement of his courage, recognition that his role had been more than mere chance. The loom itself had guided their meeting, this elder suggested, drawing together a disillusioned salvager and a wounded weaver at precisely the moment both needed the other. "I don't believe in fate," Kale said aloud, finding his voice at last. "I was just in the right place at the right time." The elder's response was gentle but firm. Perhaps what humans called fate was simply a limited perception of the complex interconnections that weavers saw clearly through the loom. All paths were connected. All beings influenced each other's journeys in ways beyond conventional understanding. "How is Ilera?" Kale asked, unwilling to debate cosmic philosophy when more immediate concerns pressed on him. "Healing," came the impression, but changed. The elder showed him images of Ilera's condition. Her desperate manipulation of the loom to create their escape route had altered her connection fundamentally. The red fractal patterns that had appeared as injuries were now permanently integrated with her natural luminescence, creating a hybrid form of connection neither purely weaver nor entirely foreign. "Will she recover?" Kale pressed. "Yes, but differently. Her perception of the loom would be changed, in some ways diminished, in others enhanced. She had paid a price for their escape, but also gained something new in the process." "And Forlag? The Wraith Fleet? Did they follow us?" The elder's impression turned grave. They had not followed through the temporary rupture Ilera had created, that had collapsed immediately after the rust bucket's passage. But the threat remained. Ilera's warning about ethyl corpse technology was deeply troubling to the weavers. Councils were already gathering, strategies being formed. And then, unexpectedly, gratitude, deep and sincere, for Kale's role in bringing this warning to them. Without him, Ilera would have been captured, her abilities exploited. The weavers would have remained ignorant of the specific threat until too late. "I just did what anyone would do," Kale demurred, uncomfortable with the recognition. The elder's response was knowing, almost amused. They both knew that wasn't true. Many would have left Ilera in her stasis pod, or turned her over to authorities, or sold her to the highest bidder once they realized her value. Kale's choices had revealed more about him than he perhaps recognized himself. As if sensing his discomfort with the direction of the conversation, the elder shifted to practical matters. The rust bucket would be repaired, enhanced, even with capabilities normally reserved for weaver vessels. Kale would be granted safe passage through any region of space, with pathways through the loom that would make conventional hyperspace routes seem primitive by comparison. "And my debts?" Kale asked, only half joking. Resolved came the simple impression, along with the equivalent of a smile. The weavers had ways of influencing systems far beyond sanctuary when necessary. By the time he returned to known space, Kale would find his financial slate wiped clean. It was more than generous. It was freedom of a kind he hadn't experienced in years. The question was what to do with it. Days passed as the rust bucket was repaired and Kale adjusted to the strange environment of sanctuary. He found himself drawn to the medical facility where Ilera was recovering, though the treatments being used were beyond his comprehension. Manipulations of energy and consciousness rather than conventional medicine. On the third day, she was finally able to receive visitors. Kale entered her recovery chamber to find her sitting up, still pale, but with the luminescence beneath her skin glowing steadily again, though now permanently intertwined with the red fractal patterns that had once been wounds. "You look better," he said awkwardly, suddenly unsure. What to say to the woman he'd risked everything to protect. "Feel better," she replied, her verbal speech still halting but clearer than before. "Thanks to you." Kale shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I just did the flying. You're the one who tore a hole in space-time. Her smile was both sad and knowing. Not just flying, believing, when others would not. They talked, sometimes in words, sometimes in shared impressions they developed during their journey, about what would happen next. The Weavers were mobilizing in response to the Ethel threat, sending messages to other hidden enclaves, strengthening the protective barriers around Sanctuary. Alara would remain with her people for now, helping them prepare despite her altered connection to the loom. "And you?" she asked finally. "We'll go." Kale had been asking himself the same question. His ship was nearly repaired, improved beyond his wildest expectations with Weaver technology subtly integrated into its systems. His debts were settled. He could return to the Outer Rim, perhaps establish himself as something more than a mere salvager with the advantages the Weavers had given him. For now, he admitted, "I don't really fit in here." Understanding flowed from her. No judgment, just acceptance of his need to process everything that had happened, to find his own path forward. "But I'm thinking this galaxy just got a lot more complicated than I realized," he continued. "And someone probably needs to keep an eye on Ethel Corp and the Wraiths from the outside." Hope brightened her expression and the patterns beneath her skin. "We'll return." Kale looked around at the impossible architecture of Sanctuary, at the woman whose existence had challenged everything he thought he knew about the universe, at the path that had brought him from cynical salvager to reluctant hero. "Yeah," he said, surprising himself with how certain he felt. "I think I will." The next day, Kale prepared to depart. The Rust Bucket, though it hardly deserved that name anymore, given its extensive upgrades, was fully repaired and ready for launch. A small gathering of Weavers came to see him off, including the elder who had first welcomed him and, supported by attendants, Alara herself. The elder placed both hands on Kale's shoulders, impressing upon him a final gift, a special perception, limited but functional, that would allow him to sense certain aspects of a loom, even without a Weaver's guidance. It would help him navigate the safer pathways and, perhaps more importantly, recognize when Ethel Corp might be tampering with the cosmic energies. Alara approached last, still physically weakened, but with determination in every step. She reached up, touching his face gently, and shared not just an impression, but a vivid vision. The two of them, in some possible future, navigating the stars together, her altered connection to the loom and his unorthodox piloting creating something neither Weaver nor human could accomplish alone. "A partnership," she said aloud, the word carefully formed. "I'd like that," Kale replied honestly. "When you're ready." "Will be," she promised. "Healing, learning new patterns, then find you." As Kale boarded his ship, he looked back at the gathered Weavers, at Sanctuary with its impossible geometry and ancient wisdom, at Alara standing proud despite her injuries. He had come seeking salvage and found instead a purpose, a connection to something vaster than he'd imagined existed. The Rust Bucket lifted smoothly, its enhanced systems responding to his touch with newfound precision. Through the special perception the Elder had granted him, Kale could see faint suggestions of the loom stretching out before him, pathways and possibilities branching into the infinite. No longer just a salvager, but something more, a bridge between worlds, a defender of connections most couldn't even perceive, and perhaps one day, partner to a living legend who had found her way home with his help. As Sanctuary receded behind him and the stars opened up ahead, Kale set course for the future, certain of only one thing. The galaxy was larger, more complex, and more wondrous than he had ever dared to imagine, and his journey through it was just beginning.